What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Today we're going to talk about the time a West Virginia Capitol building burnt down and experts tried blaming a rat with a match. That's right, today we are going to be talking about arsonist vermin. So our story begins January 3rd, 1921. A fire broke out at the West Virginia State Capitol in Charleston, West Virginia. Now, over the years, at this point, West Virginia hasn't even been a state for 60 years yet, and the Capitol has moved back and forth several times between Wheeling and Charleston. The Capitol started out in Wheeling, and then it moved down to Charleston, then it moved back up to Wheeling, and when it moved back down to Charleston, the second Capitol in Charleston, the one we will be talking about today, was the Victorian Capitol building. On January 5th, 1887, construction had wrapped up on the Victorian Capitol. This beautiful stone and brick building had 82 rooms that housed the entirety of the state government, all the offices, all the employees, and at the time cost between $400,000 and $500,000, which in 1903 would be about $1,250,000, which in 2023 dollars, because inflation is a depressing, cruel, cruel mistress, that would be nearly $21 million. Now, the fire would break out around 3 p.m. in the afternoon in the upper part of the building, almost directly above the Senate chambers, and it would start spreading very, very rapidly. Very quickly, all area fire departments were on the scene trying hard to fight the fire. One of the firefighters, unfortunately, was killed when a wall collapsed on him, and another firefighter fell nearly 3 stories off of the roof. He ended up with a broken arm and other severe injuries, but it looks like he was able to make a full recovery and survived. Now, employees that worked within the Capitol building, they basically were only able to grab what they could by hand and run out of the building. For a while, people really weren't sure how many state documents were destroyed in the fire. Luckily, a lot of the super important ones were protected for the most part by a large brick vault, so not a whole lot of documentation was actually lost. Then, while fighting the fire, sometime between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., the fire set a large amount of ammunition that was being stored in the upper part of the Capitol building actually started setting off this ammunition, and firefighters and onlookers actually had to pull back away from the fire. By 4 p.m., it was well known the Capitol was going to be an absolute loss, so attention was diverted away from the Capitol building. Firefighters actually started going on the defensive and started trying to make sure that other buildings nearby the Capitol didn't catch on fire due to the embers of the fire spreading to them. Now, one of the last people to emerge from the burning building was then Governor John J. Cornwell. He actually would exit through a side door. Whenever he left the building, it does seem like he basically walked past a bunch of firefighters and onlookers to the governor's mansion. At this point, the governor's mansion was located almost directly across the street from the Capitol building, so he just went inside where it was nice and warm and continued to watch his place of employment burn to the ground, which is, I mean, that's relatable. Why stand outside in the cold like some type of peasant when you can go inside where you can curl up by a fire, probably have a nice toasty warm beverage, and just watch the world burn? And this is essentially where all the weirdness associated with the case kind of starts floating to the surface. So the room that the fire started in was actually locked and inaccessible to firefighters. This made it extremely difficult for them to try to combat the fire. And the room that the fire started in was full of guns and ammo. So you might be wondering, how many guns and how much ammo did the West Virginia state government store in this room in the Capitol building? Roughly 1 National Guard's worth. I'm not even making that unit up. Shortly after World War I, the West Virginia National Guard was severely downsized. Now, due to the sheer amount of civil unrest in the southern coal fields, the West Virginia government thought maybe we should keep some of these guns and ammo nearby. We're talking about dozens of guns, some heavy machine guns, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. We're within a decade of the super bloody Paint and Cabin Creek strikes. We're less than a year away from the Battle of Blair Mountain. Events are already happening that will eventually lead to the Battle of Blair Mountain. The trial against Sid Hatfield and the other individuals who had taken part in the Battle of Matewan, who had been involved with the Matewan massacre, had just begun. And that was one of the longest murder trials in West Virginia history. Like, still to this day, the trial for those involved in the Matewan massacre is still one of the longest court battles to date in the state of West Virginia. While no one was hurt when all this ammo was just going off, a lot of these bullets did hit buildings close to the then Capitol building, and for many decades afterwards, you could see scars on surrounding buildings where they had just been peppered with bullets during this incident. Because of how much damage was done, especially to the guns and ammo that assumably the state was planning on using against striking miners, sabotage has always kind of been expected in this fire. People always have kind of expected it might have been someone on the inside. It might have been someone who held a vendetta against the state of West Virginia. But the leading theory in the early days of the investigation was that somehow a rat stole a match, snuck into a locked room, somehow ignited the match, and then that match was close enough to something that it could set on fire in order to catch the entire Capitol on fire. Or it could have been spontaneous combustion, which, if you're going to believe either one of those theories, you're pretty close to, like, the Men in Black showing up at your house and convincing you that the Victorian Capitol never existed. It was just a weather balloon the whole time, and that the fire was just a mirage caused by swamp gas. Like, neither one of those explanations are that great. Sabotage definitely makes more sense, but it's not just the striking miners that might have had problems with the state of West Virginia. Remember how I said that the capital of West Virginia had moved around several times in the early days of the state? Before the rubble of the building could stop smoldering, cities like Wheeling, Parkersburg, and Clarksburg were already talking to journalists and telling them that if they wanted to move the capital to their city, they'd be more than welcome bringing the capital there. Like, a lot of these cities didn't really seem to care that the capital burnt down at all. If anything, they saw it as a business opportunity. So you have disgruntled miners, you have jealous towns that want the capital moved to their cities, you have arsonist vermin, and possibly bootleggers and moonshiners might have had something to do with this as well. So this whole incident happened during Prohibition in West Virginia. West Virginia was completely dry at this point, and if you want to learn more about some of the weird things that was going on when West Virginia was under Prohibition, I did a whole video on some weird bootlegging stories you might want to check out. And if this video has entertained you so far, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you haven't yet. So prior to the fire, it was reported that hundreds of gallons of illegal liquor was supposed to be being stored at the Capitol, so that they could be used as evidence in trials and that they could build cases against moonshiners and bootleggers. They had to keep a hold of all the liquor seized as evidence. But then when the fire marshal put out their report, there was no mention of liquor in the fire report at all. Like, absolutely no mention of it. To the point where when people asked about it, essentially the fire marshal just went, "That's a weird question to be asking someone whose job doesn't involve the regulation of liquor. Next question." Now, this might just be a case of why make a big deal of some burning alcohol, some alcohol being a minor accelerant, whenever, again, the fire set off thousands of rounds of ammunition, and that really was what ended up destroying the Capitol building? Like, yeah, okay, a little bit of alcohol being an accelerant, probably not a major issue at this point. Also, another minor detail that I kind of love is it was reported that a large chemical fire extinguisher that they were using in the upper floors to try and put out the fire, when they actually had to pull back and exit the building, they left this large fire extinguisher in the building, and eventually the fire got so hot it exploded, shot the thing through the roof, and it landed in the governor's front yard on the other side of the road. Despite protest by numerous towns across the state, the offices were moved to various locations around the town of Charleston, while a temporary capitol could be built to house all the offices and elected officials. Because this temporary capitol that they built to house the government while they were building the capitol that we now have to this day in Charleston, they constructed one so hastily and so cheaply, it got the nickname the Pasteboard Capitol. One other little fact about the Pasteboard Capitol: March 2nd, 1927, it would also burn to the ground. Anyways, that's the end of the story for today. If you learned something, hit that like button, and if you like this type of content, if you like weird history, West Virginia history, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Also, if you like this kind of just weird political nonsense in general, I'm going to put a video at the end here about the time that two towns almost went to war with each other over where the courthouse was going to be located. But until next time, don't forget to stay wild, stay wonderful, and I'll talk to you later.